Thank you very much, Chancellor Patterson. I appreciate your comments. And thank you, members of the faculty and academic staff and parents and honored guests. And thank you especially, members of the graduating class, for inviting me to participate in these ceremonies. You know, I've been thinking a lot about you graduates. As a matter of fact, this morning I was shaving and my wife heard me say, "Ouch!" And she came to the door and she said, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" I said, "Yes, I think I've just been concentrating so much on this speech that I cut myself shaving." Well, my wife has always been my best advisor. And she leaned into the door and she said, "Let me make a suggestion. Why don't you just concentrate more on your shaving and just cut the speech?" Well, don't worry. In the words of King Henry VIII, who said to each of his 6 wives, "I won't keep you long." I'm going to take my lead this afternoon from a visionary leader who once graced the hallways and walkways of this university, Lee Sherman Dreyfus, for whom the Dreyfus Center on this campus was named. After serving as president and later chancellor of this university, becoming president of Century Insurance and then governor of the state of Wisconsin and a member of the University of Wisconsin System Board of Regents, Governor Dreyfus became a very successful motivational speaker. My younger brother, James Bradley, who used his undergraduate history degree to become a successful author, met up with Governor Dreyfus in an airport when they were both on the speaking circuit. So there he was, Professor Dreyfus, the former communications teacher, lecturing my brother. "I'm telling you," he said, "from one cheesehead to another, you've got to talk about 3 things and 3 things only. I don't care what the subject is, I don't care who the audience is, you just have to talk about 3 things because that's all they're going to remember." "And do you know why?" he said. "Do you know why they're only going to remember 3 things?" And my brother said, "No, why?" He said, "Because that's all they can remember." So, heeding the advice of Wisconsin's version of the great communicator, I'm going to talk to you about 3 things and 3 things only. 1, I'm going to ask you to forget. 2, I'm going to ask you to remember. And 3, I'm going to ask you to savor a special teaching moment in your time here at UW-Stevens Point. First, graduates, I'm here to tell you, you can forget almost all the specific information that you worked cramming into your brains during your years here at UW-Stevens Point. Now, why do I say that? Because the specific information that you have learned to pass a test is likely to become irrelevant and not be important by the time you get into your career, by the time you even go on to graduate school, or by the time you engage yourself in helping to make society a better place. We live in a rapidly changing world. At the time of Christ, the knowledge base of the world doubled about every 10,000 years. At the time of the American Revolution, the knowledge base of the world doubled about every 1,000 years. And by the time 1900 came around, the knowledge base of the world doubled about every 100 years. 50 years later, though, by 1950, after all sorts of inventions started to develop and technology began to take hold, the knowledge base began to double, and then by 1960, it began to double again. So that today, the knowledge base of the world, the information that you're going to need to be able to do your jobs, doubles in about 18 months. And that leads me to my second point. I just told you to forget about the specifics. And now I want you to remember the big picture. As you leave here, remember why you came here in the first place. It wasn't, I don't think, to cram as much information as possible into your head. You came to this university, I hope, to acquire the knowledge and the skills that will make you fulfilled as a person, successful as an individual, and a contributing member to society. Well, what is that knowledge? What are those skills that are so important? As Chancellor Patterson mentioned, I have the privilege of serving on the National Leadership Council for the Association of American Colleges and Universities. We went to ask the employers around the United States what they're looking for. We talked to heads of small companies, medium-sized companies, large companies, and we said, what are you looking for in our graduates to be competitive in this 21st century economy? Now, in some cases, it's important what major you selected. If you're going into nursing, you probably should major in nursing. If you're going to become a teacher, you're going to have to be in one of the teaching disciplines. But I have good news for the basic liberal arts graduates, the English majors, the people who chose to study history and music and art. According to the people who are doing the hiring, your long-term professional success will depend far more on the fact that by attending a university like the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, you acquired the essential learning outcomes that are necessary for success in this rapidly changing workplace. Listen to what the employers told us. First, they said, they expect you to have the ability to work well in teams, to collaborate, to give them the benefit of a variety of perspectives. Why? Do you think it's because they get a lot of thrill out of seeing you sit around a table getting along with each other? No. It's because it affects their bottom line. Who are the customers of these companies? Well, increasingly, they are people from different parts of the country. They're people who are from different countries altogether. People with different customs, different cultural perspectives, different ways of expressing themselves, different ways of arriving at a solution to a problem. So, if you don't have an appreciation for Chinese courtesy, Mexican machismo, Iranian indirectness, or Swedish subtlety, you just might blow the deal. You could cost your employer money. And that's just the reality of the global workplace. And that's why this university and other campuses around the University of Wisconsin system are dedicated to diversity among its students, its faculty and academic staff, and its campus leadership. That's also why the University of Wisconsin system so strongly encourages a study abroad experience and learning a second language. What we're trying to do is ensure that your educational experience will more closely mirror the reality of your job experience. Now, these employers also told us that they expect you to have an understanding of basic science and technology and how these subjects relate in the real world. Now, whether or not you're a math or a science major, they expect you to have the ability to understand statistical relevancy and just basic scientific relationships. That's why this university requires you to take basic math, maybe a statistics course, even though you may have thought that it was irrelevant to your major field of study. Those courses were not. They're all part of equipping you for a job in a modern economy. These employers also said that they expect you to be able to communicate clearly. Now, they're not interested in your emailing ability, how fast you can text, or how fast you can tweet. And they're not interested in how you might communicate with each other, with your shorthand phrases and your slang expressions. They're interested in your ability to communicate clearly, simple declarative sentences put together in a sensible paragraph that ends to a logical conclusion. And they want you to be able to do that in writing and orally. And that's why this university offered you opportunities to stand up in front of a group of people, explain a problem, and advocate a position, even though you weren't majoring in speech or drama. And that's why this university offered you opportunities to write reports about topics so that a group of people could understand the point you were trying to get across, even though you weren't an English or communications major. These employers told us that they were also looking for people who are adaptable, people who can take the knowledge and information that they have and be able to shift as this rapidly changing world unfolds. Listen to what one CEO said. He said, "We can always provide the technical training people need to work for our company. They don't have to come to us with any particular major. But because our systems and technology are changing so rapidly, we need people who can think and can adapt. And because we move people in and out of offices around the world, we need people who can understand other cultures and appreciate different approaches to problem solving." Remember that rate of change I talked about? Well, the data suggests that people like you graduating now are going to have, on average, about 10 different jobs or careers in your working lifetime. 10. It's a real-world case of Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest. Only those who can adapt will survive and thrive. But if you're a pointer, that's not a problem. And I'll tell you why I say that. As the president of a 45-member law firm with about 80 other employees operating in 2 cities, I happen to work daily with 3 outstanding pointer graduates. The first one is Lon Roberts. The highest paid person in our firm happens to be a pointer. Now, you don't see his name in lights. He's a quiet background guy. But if you looked at the major business deals occurring in central Wisconsin, more likely than not, Lon Roberts is behind those deals, advising the owners of businesses on strategy and how they're going to close the deal. A person whose advice is highly sought after in the central Wisconsin business community. The chief operating officer of our firm is also a pointer. Now, he's not a lawyer. He happens to have a business degree from UW-Stevens Point. And I said to him, "What did you think you were going to do when you graduated from UW-Stevens Point?" "Oh," he said, "I knew exactly what I was going to do. Hospital administration." I said, "Well, you're not administering a hospital now." "No, but that's where I started out. And then I worked for Wausau Insurance Companies, and I was managing 3 HMOs, health maintenance organizations around the state. And then a company bought Wausau Insurance and said, 'John, if you want your job, you're going to have to move to Massachusetts.'" He said, "I didn't want to move to Massachusetts." So I had to take my bundle of skills. I had to take my ability to adapt and walk my resume around companies that had nothing to do with hospital administration and nothing to do with HMOs. So in a competitive process, he ended up being our chief operating officer. He is responsible for tremendous organization and business success of our firm. Third person, Diana Resch. I said, "Diana, when you went to UW-Stevens Point, what did you think you were going to do?" "Oh," she said, "I knew exactly what I was going to do. Med tech." I said, "Well, you're not a med tech now." No, I got to be a sophomore at UW-Stevens Point, and I fell in love with history and social studies, and I decided that I was going to commit myself to being a teacher. I said, "Well, you're not a teacher now." "No, but I started out being a teacher." Well, my husband has a large dairy farm, and as I kept working with the accountants and with the attorneys, I said to myself, I can do that kind of work. So I packed up and I went to paralegal school. And then on a competitive process, she became a paralegal at our firm. She now is one of the top people in the firm responsible for very important client relationships and making sure that we deliver the best service possible. She is one of our top paralegals. So as you can see, these essential learning outcomes that our employers are looking for don't have anything to do necessarily with specific information that you may have learned to pass a test. But they have everything to do with how your mind works, how you assemble information, how you analyze that information, and how you explain your conclusions and advocate recommendations. So as you prepare to leave here, remember why you came here in the first place. Finally, I want you to think about some special teaching moment that you particularly savor from your experience here at UW-Stevens Point. You know, any university can have classrooms and laboratories and computers, but the differentiating characteristic of this institution and any other happens to come from the quality of the faculty and academic staff who have dedicated their lives to making you better. And if you're better, our society is better. Now, if you have been at a different university, you know how special the faculty and academic staff at this institution are. And as you go to a different institution, if you're going to continue your studies, I guarantee you, you will look back and you will reflect on how special the faculty and staff at this institution have been for you. Now, there are lots of rules at a university, but there is no rule that says you cannot write a thank you card to some professor, some person on this campus that made a difference in your life. You can savor a special teaching moment. Now, as for me, the special teaching moment that I savor happened to have occurred in my freshman year. I was taking an introductory zoology class. Now, for me, it was just 3 credits of science. But to the guy who sat next to me in this huge lecture hall, Mike Brennan, this class was absolutely essential. Mike's father had been a doctor. His grandfather had been a doctor. His family fully expected him to go to medical school. So Mike Brennan was obsessed with the idea that he had to get an A in this zoology class. Now, the professor of this class in this large lecture hall was Professor Ivankovich. You might say he was just a bit austere, but on the day of the final examination, Professor Ivankovich walked down the long aisle to the front of the lecture hall, and then he proceeded to take a stack of papers, and he walked to each student's desk and put 1 sheet of paper on each desk. On that sheet of paper were 12 boxes, and in each box was a diagram of a bird footprint. And at the top of the test it says, identify each bird by genus and species. Now, Mike Brennan went into a cold sweat. He thought, what is this? Did I miss a day? In my notes, were there 2 pages stuck together? And he just freaked out. Well, he got up, he took that sheet of paper, he walked all the way down the aisle to Professor Ivankovich, and he stood in front of Professor Ivankovich and he said, who ever heard of identifying birds by looking at their footprint? And Professor Ivankovich said, young man, I suggest you take your seat because this test is 30% of your final grade. And Mike Brennan said, I'm not going to take this test, this is crazy. And he threw the sheet of paper right at the professor. Mike turned around, he walked all the way up the aisle in this big lecture hall. Just as he was getting to the door leading out, he had his hand on the doorknob and Professor Ivankovich said, young man, what's your name? And Mike Brennan turned around, he lifted up his foot and he said, you figure it out. So that's the teaching moment that I savor. You can have your own. Good luck to you, graduates of 2011.